Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I've been thinking a lot lately about the ups and downs of being a writer, go figure. I've been writing books since I was about 10 or 11, but I didn't actually finish writing a book until I was 30 because of various mental hurdles. A big part of what finally got me to cross the finish line was coming to terms with some hard truths about being a writer, particularly as an amateur, and amateur in this sense meaning unpublished. So as I find myself in this time of needing to be reinvigorated about writing, I decided I wanted to share 5 key points that I think every writer, regardless of experience level, should hear. But first, I actually do have a writing update this week. For the week of June 30th through July 6th, I wrote 3,696 words, which brings the project total up to 115,103 words. Obviously that's fewer words than I would like in a week, but I'm also still kind of shaking off the rust a little bit, so to speak, and this week is going mostly better overall, though still fairly slow. I'm filming this on Friday afternoon, so we'll see how the weekend shakes out. But moving on, let's get into these hard truths. As a disclaimer, since I am a fantasy writer, these are somewhat framed through that lens, but I think that they are still pretty applicable across the board, regardless of your genre. Hard truth number 1, your ideas have been done before. When I was a young lad, freshly beginning my book writing adventures, I did what most people do, which was to largely copy my favorite writer's stories. Whatever I'd been reading that week became the new lens through which I would write and became my new inspiration. Now, of course, with the benefit of age and hindsight, I understand that that's actually really normal. That's how you acquire influences and how you eventually develop your own writing style. As I got older and somewhat better at writing when I was in my teens and then 20s, I obviously moved into attempting to create my own original stories, but I quickly fell into a common trap for amateur writers. I wanted to be so original that I couldn't really get any traction going on stories because as soon as they'd end up feeling similar to stories I'd already consumed, I just gave up. Granted, I also didn't yet fully grasp the importance of having a complete vision for where I wanted the story to go before starting it, but the originality problem didn't help either. The worst instances of this were when I would come up with something that I thought was pretty original, only to then engage with a new piece of media, at least new to me, and find my ideas had already been done, which would then naturally lead to me scrapping the story idea and starting over. Eventually, I came to understand that every idea you can have has already been done, and that is okay. The truth is that people want to see stories that bear resemblances to stories that they have consumed before. Our brains are wired for pattern matching. This is why so many stories are pitched as it's X meets Y. The goal is to market to the existing audiences of those previous products in order to bridge what they already know with the new in the new product. Now, obviously, I'm not saying you should just copy other stories. You should still strive for originality. What you should do is be aware of your influences and how you can merge concepts you enjoy into new shapes. Think of writing as like building with Legos, of which I obviously have plenty. When you buy a Lego set, you receive instructions to arrange the pieces in a certain way to bring the set to fruition. Part of the fun of Lego is then taking the set apart and rearranging the pieces to build your own creation. Words are the bricks, and the more you understand how to break down the pieces of books, or in this case, an official Lego set, the better you will get at building your own story. Your creation, book or Lego, will have components that resemble the things that have come before it, and that's good. The goal is to simply find ways to fit those components together to bring forth something that is exciting in its originality and comfortable in its familiarity. Hard truth number 2, a lot of what you write will be bad. Do it anyway. If I had to guess, I would assume most people who decide to start writing at any age do so because they are readers first. But a problem the amateur writer encounters pretty quickly is that, to paraphrase Ira Glass, when you're starting out, your taste as a reader far exceeds your ability as a writer. Understanding this is particularly frustrating because for most people in the bookish sphere, we actually don't remember learning to read, and we strengthened our reading skills over many years without really recognizing it. Trying to get better at writing is a far more active choice, and depending on your age, it can be really hard to swallow this particular pill. When I was 14 and trying to write, I physically couldn't reconcile why I was bad at writing considering how avid of a reader I was. But being an avid reader does not a writer make. Learning to be a better writer requires different skills than being a reader. When you are purely a reader, you don't actually have to understand or put words to the inner workings of a story and why it works or not. You simply go off of your gut feelings. You know that a story works or it doesn't, but you don't have to articulate why, and you can move on with your life. Obviously, as a writer, you do have to understand all of that. You have to understand plot structures, character arcs, how to deliver information in a way that doesn't slow down the narrative, and on and on. And getting all of that down just takes a lot of time. The main takeaway here is to be patient. If you are serious about writing, you need to accept the fact that you are not going to be very good when you start. That is easier said than done, trust me. But once you have fully internalized that your writing can and will suck at times, the actual act of writing starts to become more fun. So the lesson here is to just write. Write poorly, then reflect on what you've written, analyze it thoroughly to understand why it's bad, and learn how to improve. This is the equivalent of putting in your reps at practice or in the gym. You can't get stronger or better at your sport without both practice and actively engaging in your own improvement. And writing is the same way. Be prepared to fail, and eventually you will succeed. Hard truth number 3, stop comparing your work in progress to a published author's finished product. Comparison is the thief of joy, as the saying goes, and I think it's applicable across all of our endeavors in life. This hard truth feels like it should be a no-brainer, yet it's an easy mistake for amateur writers to make. When you first get into writing, you don't realize how many drafts and revisions a book can actually go through before it's published. For all a reader knows, a book on the shelf is how it has always been. But books do indeed go through many drafts. Sometimes it only takes a few. Other times, a book might go through 10 drafts before it goes to print. If I remember correctly, Brandon Sanderson said A Memory of Light, the last book in the Wheel of Time series, took 17 drafts before it finally was published. Now, that was partially due to having many mandatory voices in the writing process, with a lot of different people who were not just Sanderson guiding how the book was going to be written, and obviously that's very uncommon for most books. But what is common is for a book to go through anywhere from 5 to 10 drafts before it's done. It really just depends on what you want out of each draft, because you can have different focuses. Sometimes you might focus on just the line editing, so the grammar, the spelling, the punctuation, the flow of the sentences, the paragraphs, etc. Another draft might be a revision about character arcs specifically. Are things properly foreshadowed? Are character emotions consistent with their motivations and their goals? And I think you get the idea of where I'm going with that. All of this really just ties into my previous point that a lot of what you write will suck, but just remember, as Jake the dog says,
sucking at something is the first step towards being sort of good at something.
More importantly though, is that what is initially bad can be made good with editing, practice, and time. If you want to be a writer, it is better to write the worst first draft in history than to not write one at all. Hard truth number 4, most of your world building and background information is unnecessary to your actual story. I feel like this is a hot take amongst fantasy readers and writers, so here goes. Doing a bunch of world building and character background work before having an actual story to tell is misguided at best and frankly stupid at worst. I know that sounds harsh, but these are meant to be hard truths. The reason I take this stance is that for a story to work, it's not enough to have characters and settings. You need those characters to actually do something, aka interact with the plot of the story. The booktube sphere at large loves the terms character-driven and plot-driven when referring to stories, which personally I find to be a fallacious separation of two essential elements that can't be divorced in effective storytelling. Plot, characters, and setting all combine to deliver conflicts and themes that are interesting and compelling for readers to discover. Furthermore, once you understand how the sausage of storytelling is made, you can figure out how to justify plot-driven decisions through character actions, and you can justify character-driven choices through the needs of your plot. These two pieces have to work in tandem to deliver an effective story. For example, at the end of The Fellowship of the Ring, the story calls for Frodo to be separated from the rest of the Fellowship, as that drastically ups the stakes moving into the next part of the story. Then you have Sam, who also has to follow Frodo for the needs of the plot, because its character represents the themes that are important to Lord of the Rings, such as heroism, bravery, and loyalty. And he's also just the best darn friend you could ask for. These choices the characters are making to drive the story forward are happening due to the needs of the plot. Simultaneously, the characters have been developed throughout the story so as to justify the decisions that they make in order to engage with the needs of the plot. Frodo chooses to go alone because he alone can bear the weight of the ring. It corrupts everybody else it comes in contact with. Sam chooses to follow Frodo because not only is he a steadfast friend, but he also made a promise to Gandalf to keep Frodo safe, and Sam would rather die than break his word. These character traits allow them to drive the designs of the plot forward. Without these characters, this plot does not exist. Without this plot, these characters don't exist. Characters and plot must be developed together for a story to really work. Where all of this actually intersects with my hard truth here is that you might think that in order for your story to be adequately character-driven, you need to have the character's whole life story figured out before you start writing. You need to know their favorite foods, their favorite colors, their favorite toys from when they were 5, their childhood crushes, etc. However, you, the writer, don't need any of that figured out before you start writing, and we, the readers, won't care about those details unless it actually affects the plot. Similarly, when it comes to world building, you might want to create a rich history for your fictional realm that stretches back ages. That is not inherently bad, especially if world building is your focus instead of actual storytelling, but when it comes to actually telling a story, readers don't need to know about how King Bramblesnort built a bridge over the Fliffernaff River in the 5th century, uniting the lands of Grumbo and Wobble columns, unless the characters actually go to that bridge. Then, if you have a character who really likes history and knows all about this bridge, you can weave that character's knowledge into dialogue to both deliver this as world-building information and establish some character traits. When starting a story, you really only need to have some sense of your character's motivations and goals. Where do you see them starting? Where do you see them ending? Everything else in the middle can be discovered along the way as it becomes relevant. Endlessly creating characters and world-building elements in a vacuum is just a procrastination tactic to avoid doing the actual work of writing a story, which conveniently brings me to my final point. Hard truth number 5. To be a writer, one has to actually write. Thinking about your writing and your story is easy and often more fun than doing the actual work of writing. When you're coming up with your ideas, nothing has to be cohesive. They can exist as a garbled mishmash in just your brain, or if you write it down, it can be something that only has meaning to you and wouldn't make sense to anybody else reading it. Unfortunately, to be a writer, you actually have to sit down and write, preferably in coherent sentences, so that the information in the story does make sense to other people. Social media is full of writers who don't actually write, much like it's full of readers who don't actually read. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but if you're not writing, you're not really a writer. This doesn't mean that you can't take 20 years to write your story. Frankly, breaks are often necessary in the creative process, and everyone's life circumstances are different, and so you might have a break that lasts for 2 years. At the same time, it's okay for someone to recognize that writing might not fit into their life at the present moment, and that's totally fine. It's better to accept what you can't do instead of pretending that you are doing it. And it's also okay to move on from writing as a hobby if you're finding it's not the thing that you actually enjoy doing. It's a creative work just like anything else, and you are allowed to try out hobbies and find out whether you like it or not. And if you don't like it, you're also allowed to move on. And you should never feel guilty about that. But if you're gonna call yourself a writer, eventually there comes a point where you have to put your butt in the chair, your hands on the keyboard, and just write. But I think that's all for today. Thanks for stopping by. I hope this video made you laugh, made you cry, made you do something in between. If you liked the video, please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Leave a comment below if you have any thoughts about these 5 hard truths. Also, I know the title of this video is a little clickbaity, but I just wanted to see if it would work to get additional views. Don't hate the player, hate the game. As always, I hope that you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you here in the next video.